Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making Action Happen. I'm Sarah Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
And we've got Adam Frisch with us today. This is an extra special episode. As you all know, the Action 22 annual meeting is coming up, and we've been having a lot of discussions about energy. And I don't think we can talk about it enough. But when Adam was on our show a few weeks ago, he started to talk a little bit about it, and I was so taken with what he was saying that I lost my train of thought. So I asked him to come back so that we could take a deeper dive on this, especially since it's going to be the primary focus of day 2 of our annual meeting in just a couple of weeks. So Adam, thanks for coming back.
It's great. I think this is trip 20 to Pueblo. Always glad to be back. First time I haven't been sweating because it's actually probably about 50 degrees outside.
It is 50 degrees outside. It's rather cool. I just came from the homecoming parade up in Rye, and so I was rushing, and we were all sitting out there shivering. But it feels good. I'm a fall person. So, but it begs the question, of course, about energy, especially when it starts to get cold. And now, in the summertime, we don't think about it as much, but we're having a lot of conversations about end users, all of the above approach. So can we just rewind for a minute and you talk about really why? Because energy is one of your things.
Yeah,
that's one of
exactly.
So
pro
will you
energy,
tell us,
pro jobs.
Yeah. So will you talk a little bit about what your position is on that? Because I think some people, because you're running as a Democrat, but they're surprised a little bit by what you're saying. Almost they don't believe it.
Yeah,
right?
No, I appreciate that. So, thanks for allowing to have the conversation. Huge fan of Action 22, of course. Excited to come to the annual meeting as well. To me, I'm a math person, and there is just, I think we all agree that it'd be great to kind of start moving that needle more and more to deal with. We do have a drought, we do have a climate crisis going on, but we have a math problem, and the loudest part of the left doesn't understand the math problem, or they don't want to, or they're being disingenuous, actually talking about things for short-term political gains, but not really realizing what's going to have to happen in 2030 or 2050. And obviously, I think it's important, the couple comments I've made, and, there's a lot of hard things about running for Congress. One of the easy things is what I've said as a dad and a business person, like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, is exactly what I told people during my primary, and I'm saying the exact same thing now. So whatever people hear from me, please understand, I'm a sincere person, and these are the comments that I've been having for a long time. Listen, at the end of the day, if we're going to produce natural gas or we're going to produce oil, it's better to be produced in Colorado and the United States than overseas. I would bet you that the factories, if you will, and the working conditions in natural gas and oil in Colorado are probably better than what the process is to produce solar panels in China. Right? I mean, just the extraction that comes out of that, the child labor laws are probably violating that they don't even have over there. And we just, we have a lot of demand in this country for energy. And I think it's important to realize that there's a certain amount that needs to be produced. And by just shifting it away or saying you don't want it to happen doesn't mean it doesn't need to be produced somewhere. Like water does not just come out of the tap. Food does not grow in the back of the Safeway supermarket. And oil the gasoline just doesn't come out of the gas tank that we all go and fill up every once in a while. And so I've just been very thoughtful, I think, and being realistic. Of course, we want to get to more green, more locally produced. But there's just even in the Washington Post, which is not a far-right newspaper, had this conversation. They are actually disappointed that the Democratic-led House did not support the focus that Joe Manchin wanted to offer. Now, part of it was for his own little West Virginia expansion of some deregulatory environment to make sure that can be produced. But the problem is, even if we have all this electrification happening, at the rate this country is going and producing the supply of transmission lines, it would be 80 years, 80, it would be 8 decades for us to be able to produce the amount of supply of transmission lines to produce all this electrification that we need if we get rid of all of this non-renewable energy. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit like if all of a sudden we had all the water we could have in south and western Colorado, we have nowhere to store it.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to figure out a place to store it. And so I just think that there's a disconnect between what some of the loudest people in the Democratic Party are saying about energy independence and where we need to go. And unfortunately, like today and yesterday is a perfect example. Half the Biden White House is trying to figure out how to make it harder and harder in the United States, let alone in western and southern Colorado, produce energy. And at the same time, the other half of the White House is literally begging Saudi Arabia and in negotiations with Venezuela about to open up more. And so like we are reducing more cleaner supply of energy in our own state that doesn't need to be transported very far, while we are going literally around the world or down below in Venezuela or in Saudi Arabia asking for more oil. It's completely bonkers.
Yeah, and going back to just the conditions of where we get this, whether it's solar panels in China or oil from the Mideast, if you've ever been to the Mideast and been to some of the countries that have oil refineries and wells there, it is not good. And we're talking coastal cities like on the Gulf, and you go out on the beach and it's just trash. It's oil barrels, waste, this, and that's where we're getting it. I don't think I've seen one oil extraction operation or refinery in Colorado or the country, and I've been to a lot of them, even back in Kansas, where it's dirty, where it's polluted, where there's just stuff everywhere and polluting the environment. And I think that's something that gets skipped over. Like, okay, let's reduce our extraction here. Well, we still got to buy it from somewhere that really doesn't have these laws and regulations, and they're just trashing the earth.
No, I mean, if a barrel of oil is going to be produced, it's better for the global climate that it comes from the United States and some of our European allies. You can look up at Norway, which is a big energy producer as well in the oil fields and offshore as well, compared to, it's a little bit of just whether you want to call it bad luck or however it had. Now, you look at where a lot of this energy is. It's either in really, really bad countries that is not good for national security, and being beholden to Venezuela for anything is really, really bad. Being beholden to Saudi Arabia is very, very bad. Having to try to have these conversations with Iran is really, really bad. And we're trying to reduce their nuclear proliferation down there. At the same time, in the back of our head, we have to be concerned because we're a customer. And that is really complicated to get in those kind of things. And that's why we should be doing it here. And, I think there is a way, to me, regulatory, it's the consistency. People really want to know for the next X amount of years. And, as a lot of these producers, ideally, they have 15 or 20 years that they really need before they make a commitment. Yeah. And they're fine having higher standards than anywhere else. They just need to be consistent so they can plan long term. Yep. And that's not allowed to be done because every 2 years, there's a different conversation going on.
So I think that's one of the things that I always feel like I'm missing some part of the argument that we will beg to get into bed with Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or one of these other countries while we beat up on ourselves on this energy. What am I missing in this conversation? What's the rationale? It can't be that illogical, and so many people, it get pushed so hard. What am I missing? Either one of you can answer that question.
Some of it, I think, is out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Like, we're Colorado has made some decisions, not based on economics, but based on this greater good of the climate crisis that we're having, that we should be shutting down coal plants in X amount of years, right? And so if some of that coal plants ends up going to natural gas, that's all great from one conversation. But if this coal production is just going to be moved to Utah or Wyoming or back to China, then we're just not winning. And why we might be able to check a box and consider ourselves good Coloradoans, all we're doing is outsourcing a problem, and we're making it worse off. And to me, that's not a good neighbor, just to kick the can down the road or kick it over to another country.
Yeah, and it's good intentions. I mean, this is not some evil conspiracy to shut us down and break the backs of the working class. It's good intentions. Of course, everybody that's young and idealistic that's up there in D.C. or the Capitol, they want what's best, and in their mind, this is what's best. And I can't disagree with them on that. It's just with maybe I'm getting old, a little more experience looking back. The world doesn't work that way. You can't just shut stuff off and have everything great.
So maybe, and it feels like hubris, the argument that if we just set the example that everybody will fall in line, if we set the example of this, and it doesn't feel like it's really about energy security. And that's where we came at it from, especially when we were looking at what happened in 19 at the state legislature. And then what happened again, there's another attack or another something else every single year, it feels like. So this last year it was House Bill 1362 that was a de facto shutting down of natural gas in the future. But if you go and you look at what the EPA says or anybody else that really says if you want to reduce emissions, one of the most powerful, pun intended, transitional vehicles is natural gas. But now all of a sudden we've gotten rid of coal, we've gotten rid of, we're getting rid of coal and it's going to be this. And now it's an attack on natural gas.
Yep.
And there's not that space, and it depends on who you're talking to, whether they'll say, oh yeah, we can go complete electrification. It's no problem. It's going to happen regardless. Let's just push it forward.
Yeah, I mean, in 2010, I think the country's power grid was supplied by about 10% renewable. Recently, it's now at 24. So we're basically about a quarter of our energy as the United States is from renewable energies, which is great. And I wish we'd spent more time talking about geothermal because it's not like when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. Geothermal is 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And we don't need a battery. We don't need a storage. So I wish more of that was discussed. But at the end of the day, it's not just – we also need it to be locally produced. And I know that there's a bunch of great solar fields here in Pueblo. I think we all need to honor – we have this 150-year-old mill, the steel mill, is 90% solar powered. It's the only steel mill in the world that's solar powered at that level. It's a great story. Right next or soon close to that, we have 800 jobs coming, I believe, to be the largest producer in the world of the wind turbine towers. Mm-hmm. It was Veritas from the Netherlands. I think a South Korean company is owning it now. So a lot of those solar powered, a lot of those wind towers are going to be produced right here in Pueblo, Colorado. There's obviously a legacy of steel and understanding of welding. So there's great things happening, but it can only do so much. And again, when you produce solar or any type of electricity, which is different than energy, when you produce the electricity, you have to store it somewhere or you have to send it somewhere. And we literally do not have the power grid to move things around. And this regulatory environment, which we need some type of regulation, we need to be balanced, we need to protect the environment and wildlife and everything else like that. But it's going to be 80 years before we have enough of the supply of the transmission lines to move all the solar powered around and all this wind around, let alone the battery. The battery stuff will come. There is great things happening in storage, and we should invest in that. But we should also realize that the materials that go into the batteries, copper and other places, are coming from really challenging national security sensitive countries as well.
Yeah, and it's not just people say rare earth minerals like lithium, right?
It's copper.
And copper, anything like this. But it's not necessarily that they're coming from there. The only place they can process this is China right now.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, nobody can do this. We can't do it. We can mine lithium. I think Utah has one of the largest lithium deposits in the world. But can't do anything with it unless we send it to China and have them refine it and then send it back.
Why?
It's just a refinery process. Same thing as gasoline. You take the oil out, it has to go to a refinery to create gasoline. So these rare earth minerals like lithium, I don't even think lithium's rare earth, but it's a mineral that's needed. It can only be processed. It needs to be processed and can only be processed in China and come back.
So what is the mining? What's the impact of mining and capturing those rare earth minerals that are needed for batteries and for phones and for all this technology? It's
probably one of the most extreme, for lack of a better term, mining operations. So it's similar to
pretty.
Yeah, it's not pretty. So even if you look at coal mines, gold mines, anything like that, they dig a hole in the ground, they go in and get it, or you could strip mine it. But with a lot of these rare earth, it's a process. It will destroy the land where they get it out, which is one reason why the United States has tended to avoid that. And we do have, again, like lithium deposits. It's like our lithium reserves, stuff like that. But it's not a pretty mining operation at all.
Yeah, which doesn't mean we should, we need to continue towards some type of electrification without a doubt. But I think we need to be humble and realistic and respectful to those that are in the business of doing this because it takes a bit of hubris to really hammer down at people, men and women, that are doing that at the same time. Yeah. They're consumers of it. And I say that I'll pick on AOC. She's one of the loudest voices against what's going on in this transition and not doing it respectfully. And, I used to live in New York City for a while. I'm pretty sure that her constituents probably use 5 times as much energy per capita than the men and the women in Pueblo, Colorado, or on the Western Slope, or in Rifle, Colorado, or in Mesa County. And that's the frustration of the conversation. And this is where the Democratic Party, and why I became a Democrat at the end of December after 20 years off, is because they've just lost the ability to have this conversation. And the Democrats want to have all these conversations about this tax bill and that tax bill. But before you want someone to get involved in the tax bill, you can't keep calling them and denigrating how they put food on the table for their family. Yeah. And that is where the Democratic Party has made a huge gaffe. And with rural America and working class America, is just disrespecting them before you can get to the economic conversations. There's dignity that needs to be honored.
Yeah, and going back to the rare earth mineral mining, like I'm not saying we shouldn't do it; it's needed. But would you rather have China do it, or would you rather have the United States do it?
We just passed. I'm a huge supporter of this infrastructure bill, right? That's been passed, and we need asphalt. And we need concrete and stuff. And asphalt is a byproduct of the dredges of the oil refinery, right? And when that gets done, we need to use that in there. And we're about to spend, billions and billions of dollars that we need to make our roads better. And it goes back to the same conversation. We need the byproduct of that oil. So we cannot just get rid of oil like that, because there's all sorts of other things and the plastics that come from it. And yes, a more sustainable world is all great. I'd love to get there. I've worked on this kind of stuff, but I've always tried to be very respectful and honest, intellectually honest about the process.
So the problem that I'm seeing between the party divide, the Republicans and Democrats, specifically in Congress, you have the Republican side that's, drill baby drill, that's it. Like they don't want to have the conversation. And you have the Democrat side saying, no, shut it all off. Like we're going to drive Teslas with batteries that magically come from the sky. I don't see anybody in Congress, and I'm sure they are behind the scenes, but at least publicly having these conversations saying, hey, no, let's look at their side of it. Let's talk to the Republicans, let's talk to the Democrats and come together and do this. I have not publicly or on the news seen anybody saying that right now.
I've been discovering some podcasts as I've gotten down this journey. And the Western Caucus, which is made up of mostly, I would say it's probably 95% Republicans and a handful of Democrats, and I'd love to get in this thing. They're having some really interesting conversations about energy. And everyone's saying the same thing, no matter how hardcore you are. Yes, we want to move this needle, but yes, we have to deal with the math and we need to deal with the process. And let's look and see to make sure that we're not on one hand shutting things off here. At the other hand, we're running around to some really bad countries. As I said, it's not like we're getting solar power from Denmark when we decide to shut down oil and nat gas in Colorado or anywhere else in this country. We're getting the exact same material that's much worse off for the humanity and the climate and labor laws, and we're spending all sorts of time and money and energy transporting it halfway around the world instead of trying to move it within our state. And that's the frustration that I have, is it just as a human being, let alone as being part of a party that's just not doing the math. Mm-hmm. And that gives me heartburn.
Well, that's a little bit about what we're talking about when we say energy independence.
Yes.
Right? It's who do we trust to produce the energy? If we're not trusting them to do be humanitarians as a nation, or we have some conflict from a military side, or all of those things that we don't, but we're going to trust them with something like energy.
Yeah,
I think that's the next logical step, to have that conversation over what are we actually talking about here. And like Brian said, we don't hear anybody talking about it because both parties and and candidates and these legislators on both sides are getting so entrenched into their party that, to stick your head out and look around. It is election
season.
It is. No, I know. I know, but it's not unique to election season. These are conversations. These are things that have been happening on either side of that calendar and it's not like this is all of a sudden a new thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and you mentioned it. I think drill, baby, drill is a bumper sticker, but I think it's a pretty derogatory one because I think when I'm talking to the men and the women that are in this field, they understand that there needs to be some real movement and some real thoughtfulness going into this transition. You know, as I think I mentioned before, I'm up in Moffett and Rio Blanca, and I'm meeting men and women making 16, 17, 18 bucks an hour as electricians or plumbers in a hotel or somewhere else in the resort community aspect of their town, and they were making $61 an hour, doing pretty much the exact same trade out in an ACAT field or in the coal mine, and they don't need job training. They just need an industry that's actually going to pay properly. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't start making these transitions, but unless the Democratic people truly understand that there's more than just a 3.5% unemployment rate, there's quality to unemployment, not just the quantity to the unemployment. And people need to realize when you're making $60 an hour, that's $115,000 a year. That's a real career and that's a real job. Making $17 an hour, and trust me, we all know there's people that make a lot less than that per hour, but $17 an hour from $61 an hour, it's not a surprise why there is a growing frustration in the working class that no one is listening to them.
So when you get elected to Congress, okay, first day there, you go through everything. How are you going to make your side of the aisle listen to what you're saying right now? How are you going to approach the Democrats and say, hey, guys and girls, we need to think about this? What's your strategy on that?
Well, I mean, I get asked all the time, and I'm speaking in front of the Chamber of Commerce's around the district. I was here down in Pueblo a couple weeks ago. I thought that was it wasn't a conversation because Lauren Boebert wasn't there or whatever, but people come up to me after and say, Adam, I like what you have to say. I know you're trying to be sincere, but I'm really concerned about you just kind of falling into the traditional Democratic trap, if you will. And I keep on telling people, I don't report to anyone in DC, no matter how senior or powerful they're supposed to be. I'm going to be hired and hopefully rehired in a couple years later, not for longevity, but for some period of time, because I'm taking care of the men and the women and the families and the businesses in this community. And I'm just going to go tell them, hey, listen, what I told people to get elected is what I believe. I'm not just making stuff up and all of a sudden I'm going to cave in here now. If the Democratic Party, more importantly, if the country wants to get a handle on an energy policy, we need to start at the top about what the goal is and then figure out what tools we want to use. But I'm certainly not going to be shy letting people know, whether it's the executive branch or at the legislative branch, listen, you cannot just hammer down regulatory stuff down our mouth and then show up in Iran and Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and ask for help. It just makes us look foolish. And that's what we have, a foolish energy policy right now as a country. And we have had one for a really long time because the Democrats are not the only ones that show up in the Middle East hat in hand. Mm-hmm. And we'd have a much safer world and a lot fewer people going overseas to serve if we actually didn't have to be beholden at some level to a lot of bad countries, especially in the Middle East.
So this is a rhetorical question, but the correlation between foreign policy and energy policy, there's not a lot of difference, right? There's not a lot of separation.
They're linked. I mean, if Saudi Arabia didn't have a lot of this oil production, we certainly wouldn't be over there as much as we are. We would certainly have a more clear policy with some of these communist socialist countries in Latin America. We'd be able to deal with Iran and its nuclear proliferation and being a big bully in the Middle East a lot better than we are right now. And it's mucking up the safety of concern, and it's putting a lot of men and women that put on a uniform and go serve overseas at risk. And this is a problem that we're running into all the time. And that's why, again, we need to figure out how to have consistency in the office. And it'd be great if we could figure out, and some type of dream of allowing people to explore and find out where they need to do, and then honor them some type of 20-year commitment that they can be grandfathered in at these regulatory levels and allows that the chance to have it work. We need to figure out how to produce more energy because no one's going to do it cleaner and no one's going to do it safer than the United States, especially in Colorado and especially in CD3.
And one other thing, speaking of energy, carbon capture technology is up and coming right now.
Yep.
And you have this technology that's being developed and innovated by oil companies, coal companies, this is their thing. They're saying like, look, okay, if we're going to go down this road, we're going to develop the technology to make this as clean as possible. And that seems to be out of the conversation too, because carbon capture technology is insane right now. It's better than it's ever been in years.
Yeah. There's new technology. Technology cannot save us completely, but obviously battery storage is going to get better and a lot more efficient, and we need to have that part of it. But we also need to be intellectually honest about how a battery is made and how much work it can actually do, and the transmission lines that we need to move it from one battery. We have solar panels now in Pueblo, but all the energy is not just sticking in the same zip code. It's moving across the state, maybe even further away. There are some parts in the mountains in Colorado that are getting wind power from Nebraska. Right. And so we also need to remember that the lack of localization is also a problem, regardless of the type of energy that's being produced. But we're never going to get to 100% locally produced renewable energy. It's a great goal, and let's think about trying to get there. But we also have to be, I'm burdened with realism, and sometimes that might not be the right thing to do in politics or elected service. And especially, I think that there are some unrealistic conversations we could have as the Republican Party about not being realistic about some conversations. But the Democrats, they have a burden that they're not really focused on the reality of how the numbers are working in energy. And that's something that needs to be brought to their attention of everybody.
So let me ask you this, being burdened with realism, is it unrealistic to imagine that Colorado could be the leader in creating cleaner, this is the model for a cleaner natural gas. This is the model for cleaner whatever, that we could be the leaders in that if we were willing to invest in figuring those things out. Is that unrealistic?
No, not at all. I mean, I think we have some of the cleanest coal production in the country, in the world. I think we have some of the cleanest natural gas production in the world. We have a 150-year-old steel mill that's 90% solar powered. We're producing wind turbine towers. We have lots of wind. We have lots of sun. Everybody has 55-degree, 7 feet under the ground to work for geothermal and some other things to help cool naturally when things are hot. And so there's all sorts of things that could be done, and we are seeing those strides. But I would rather see us arguing about the success and who wants to take credit, Republicans or Democrats, for all the success we're having, instead of fighting over all the failures that are not being happening because people are unwilling to work in a bipartisan manner. And I want to fight over the success, not over the failures.
So let's talk about, just for a second, the economic impacts of this transition. And the term just transition gets thrown around a lot, which is a really bothersome term to me, because nobody can, it depends on who you ask. So there's two things it depends on who you ask. I'm going to get a different answer from. So on the just transition side, or this transition, the economic impacts, immediate and long term, for our communities that are already marginalized or already struggling, what's the reality there?
Well, I mean, I think just transition was well-meaning at the start, but it's turned into be a pretty superficial conversation, and I think it's an offensive. It's taken offensively, I think, when you go out and talk to men and women that are out there. Whether and I believe that it was well-meaning to start with, but there just needs to be a fairness and a reality that when you go from $60 an hour to $15 an hour for a lot of families, it's going to create huge amounts of social upheaval. And just from a pure pocketbook standpoint for the city and county treasurers, they're being decimated. Right. And I think we need to realize, and it's not just fair to say, Sarah, I'm sorry you've been working in this business for a long time. Just hang out. And in 10 years, the solar power truck's going to come around. And the conversations I'm having with a lot of men and women who are working down in the steel mill making $50 an hour, if you will, and they put up some solar panels, a bunch of people come in for $15 an hour. They put them all up. And there might be 50 people to install them, but you only need 2 or 3 people to watch them. Right. And so it's not a just trade. It's not a fair trade. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that happen, but we need to be a lot more realistic about what we truly need to manage and honor. But half of this is a psychological, emotional conversation where a lot of people just feel like no one is listening to them, whether they're not listening to them in Denver or they're not listening to them in DC. And one of the ways that you do fairly well in public service and civic thing is you become a good listener, and there aren't people listening. And it's the same people that are sitting in the Cherry Creek high rises voting, hey, wouldn't it be cute to have the Wolves come back? And they check that box. And wouldn't it be great if all of a sudden we just have everyone who is doing coal and energy, they can start driving around solar panel trucks. Yes, it would be great, but it's not going to happen for a really, really long time. And there's just a whole different economic model. And we need to figure out how to transition that's fairly and with honor and dignity, because that honor and dignity is not happening from the left side of this political conversation.
So let me ask you this. So the other part of that, it depends on who you asked. The timeline changes. So I have found so far that if somebody's invested in one energy resource or another, they're going to give you a different timeline. Where do you get the timeline that's going to take 80 years to build that transition or that transmission rather? Sorry.
I got that I read this surprising editorial in the Washington Post a day or two after Joe Manchin, he supported this Inflation Reduction Act, and for that he was promised by the Senate Majority Leader that Joe Manchin would get a vote on this regulatory fix thing. And it died, and the Republicans voted no against it. I think partly as political payback, which is a whole nother crap show that happens in there. But the Washington Post wrote this editorial day or two after saying people might be surprised, but we should have supported that, because if you look at the math and you have X amount of energy that you need to move around, and you have 0.2 X% of capacity, and you look at how often the growth happens of transmission line supply, and you draw it out, it's going to be 80 years before we actually have the supply of transmission lines for all this electrification we need. Because, if we want to be 80% renewable by X amount, you need to have X amount, Y amount of gigawatts moving all over the place, or whatever the term is. And we don't have that. And the Washington Post is saying people need to start figuring out a much better regulatory environment for which to put up transmission lines. And, and a lot of powerful communities, they're small, but they're powerful. They want all these lines buried. And so there's all sorts of conversations that need to happen. It's no different than the battery and the electrification of the auto industry. Like, Pueblo's a fairly good sized city, but between here and Walsenburg and going up to Nucla and Dove Creek and everything that's happened up in Moffat County, we don't have a place like in Denver. There's probably a charging station every 4 blocks outside the cafe, the Espresso Cafe. Well, in Western Colorado, you could be driving a really long time before you get anything. And so a lot of farmers and ranchers and people are like, what in the world are people thinking or smoking in Denver or DC in DC to not really realizing it? And there's just a huge urban centric conversation happening. And a lot of people in rural America and working class America don't feel like they're part of the conversation.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just going on your race right now. I kind of want to switch topics a little bit. You just got some polling numbers back, and it's a statistical tie between you and your opponent, correct?
Yeah. We were down 7 points in July. We're now down 2 within a margin of error of 4. So I think we are in a dead heat, and the conversation I've been having for a long time is that it's going to be a bipartisan conversation going on for me to build this coalition of people. I know there's some people that are supportive of me as a person, skeptical of kind of falling into this Democratic trap or party trap. Both parties kind of suck people in. But as you see, there's a list of 435 members in Congress in this bipartisan ranking that the Lugar Center does through Georgetown. And I want to be in the top 10 bipartisan member. And our current representative is 433. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is 434. And there's some Democrats at the bottom of that list as too, for sure. My goal is to be a top 10 bipartisan member of Congress. And I tell people forever, if there was a Get Stuff Done party, I'd be in the Get Stuff Done party. But the Get Stuff Done party is not doing very well right now. So it's working out well. We have a republicansforfrisch.com website that's out there. We mailed out thousands and thousands of invites to registered Republicans and unaffiliated that have voted Republican in the past. And I'm down here to launch my tour. I'm going on a town hall tour. I'll be in Pueblo this afternoon, and then Walsenburg, and then Alamosa, and over to Cortez and a bunch of other places, and finishing up in Glenwood and Grand Junction. And we're on about mile 25,000 and documented 25,000 miles. We don't have to go into those details, whatever, but it's just driving. You guys know I'm in Pueblo. Like I've been in Pueblo like every week since February, and I'm in Grand Junction every other week, and I'm all points in between. And it's one of the most beautiful district in the entire country. I'm happy to get around. People want the circus to stop, and they want someone to actually focus on the job, and I'm trying to focus on the job.
Yeah.
What traveling the district? What are the disparities that you're seeing? Because the 3rd Congressional District is interesting in that you have some of the wealthiest communities in Colorado and some of the poorest communities in Colorado. In the country, yeah. So what's the? It's tough because you go into one and it's a different set of people you look at and talk to. Yeah. So what are you hearing from some of these poorest communities? What are their concerns? And then to be fair, what are you hearing from the wealthier communities? What are their concerns?
I think there's some common themes. One, everybody loves some type of outdoors, and everyone considers themselves a conservationist who lives in western and southern Colorado. Whether you're hunting or farming or ranching or fishing, whatever you're doing, people love some type of outdoor stuff. And I appreciate Pueblo is 150,000 people or so, and Junction's about 100,000 people. But everyone has some type of small town character commitment that they feel like. And I grew up in the Midwest in Minneapolis after my time in Montana. But even in Pueblo, it feels like a pretty small town, and everyone's related to everyone. I guess I learned that one in a hurry.
Oh, yeah.
But I still think there's a commonality over that. And there's a lot of commonalities. There's just a huge report from the Latino community. And it was the same thing as everyone else, which is safe schools, right? Good schools, safe communities, clean air, clean water, the saving water is really important, and the prior appropriations needs to remain to be the hallmark of how we want to operate in CD3 and in Colorado, and that's a concern. Energy costs, inflation costs are beating everyone up. Getting better, stable wages is really important. In the higher end communities that I know fairly well as well, there's an affordable housing issue, and they've been having those conversations for 50 years or 20 years. And obviously, I'm in Pueblo, and I'm in Alamos, I'm in Walsenburg, I'm in Grand Junction, Trinidad. They're having the same conversations about affordable housing now. So, there's a lot more that we all have in common: rich, poor, urban, rural, Democrat, Republican. That we have difference. And again, I wish we would be fighting over all the successes we had and who could take credit than fighting over the foibles of yelling and screaming and stuff. And that's where we're running into things. But healthcare access is really big. Mental health care is a really big thing. Picken County, where I'm from, one of the wealthiest counties in the country, has some of the highest suicide rates and mental health issues in the country as well. So money does not solve all problems. We all know that as well, but it's case in point with the numbers. And again, 80% of the people I talk to, or 90% of the people I talk to, because I seek them out, just want a quality of life, and part of that quality of life is less political noise.
That's the whole thing in a nutshell right there. So if somebody asks me where as Adam Frisch is on energy, can I say that he is looking strictly at the math? So all of the above, what energy, the math on it, both economically and impact on the environment. Is that a safe characterization?
Yeah, it is. I'm a realist. I would love to continue to move that we get to more renewable resources, but we also have to be realistic and respectful in conversation, because neither side has been that respectful to the other when we've had conversations. It's hard to get to the realism. And you need to get by the respect before you can get to the realism conversation. And all of the above needs to happen. We need to be realistic about what's going to go on. And when we do ABC, we need to understand that XYZ is going to happen down the road, and we all need to row in the same boat going forward. And storage is really important. Green energy is really important. But we need to figure out a way to do it, again, with respect and with the numbers in the back of our minds. It's going to take some period of time.
And by the way, being respectful, I think, means asking questions with real intent and then listening for the answers.
Listening is a big one. So if you had your choice of committees to sit on, what would number 1 and number 2 be?
Well, water. I mean, natural resources, and try to get on and try to focus on the water thing would probably be number 1. Some type of conversation that's going on in the ag world, I think would be important too. I don't think we've had someone there for a while that's really focused on it. And so I think agriculture will be really, really important as well. There's a subcommittee that happens to deal with kind of the foreign relations of that. And we want to, I think beef is still the top export in Colorado, even with all of our fancy technology and everything else we're doing. And so I think that needs to be important as well. I could probably do some work in banking and foreign affairs, but I really want to focus to the nuts and bolts of issues that affect CD3. And I think that is ag, some type of energy conversation, and water for sure.
Thank you, Adam, so much. I appreciate you taking the time. I really wanted to have a little bit deeper dive on the whole energy thing.
This has been great.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Let's make a plug for your upcoming annual meeting.
Annual meeting, October 21st and 22nd. Go to action22.org. It'll pop right up, and you can buy your tickets there. I think they're cheap right now, but they go expensive by the time this gets out.
Yeah, they do. I think the 14th of...
The 14th.
Yeah, you need to
October
get them
14th.
now.
After that, they go up to $150. There's sponsorship opportunities available from $500 all the way up to as much as you want to give us. And of course, there are opportunities and things that come with that at different levels. Action 22 does not endorse candidates during an election season. We do support our members. So if you're a member of Action 22, this is your platform. You can come on, tell us what you're about. Come on as many times as you want, actually. If you want to come on 3 times, come on 3 times. So with that...
Chad Forthman, I know you're listening. I know that you don't think about ag very much, but I just want to point out that our friend here just said that the most important things were water and ag. And we'd love to have you on the show so that you can demonstrate how to answer some actual questions. And you can talk a little bit about what you feel about ag. But, if you want to, Chad, I know that you're out of town all the time.
But when you come on the show, we have to drink whiskey while on the show.
Oh, hey, whoa, where's my whiskey?
There's some upstairs.
and mustaches. Yeah. Whiskey and mustaches.
I want to thank you both in Action 22. Obviously, learning about Action 22 and Club 20, your brethren up there, has been great. And it's great to see that there are these multi-jurisdictional conversations going on. And it's really important. And again, we need to get to a place where we're arguing over who gets credit for the success.
Yep. And what's the website again?
It's adamforcolorado.com and republicansforfrisch.com.
All right.
All right. We hope to see you guys all on the 21st and 22nd. Again, if you have any questions on that, you can email us at show@action22.org. You're going to want to be there. It will be interesting and fun. We'll talk to you guys next time.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.